These are devotions for people at a social distance. This morning in my devotions, I was reading in Genesis chapter 29. It is the story of Jacob. When he is fleeing from his brother, he comes to a certain place and he comes across a well in the middle of the desert. And this is what it says. As he looked, he saw a well in the field and 3 flocks of sheep lying there beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large. And when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep and put the stone back in its place on the mouth of the well. Now, this is pretty clearly what's being described here is an ancient strategy that was used when people shared a well. Obviously, water being one of the most precious resources when you're in a dry land. And this well was shared. And the way that they managed this was that they put a stone on top of this well that was so large that it could only be moved by a great number of shepherds. And it worked like this. If one shepherd came by with his flock, he couldn't move the stone. It was too big. They had to wait for all of the shepherds, all of the flocks to come together. And only then would there be enough people to move this massive stone. So this stone was used as a way of ensuring that this precious, precious resource of water was not dominated by any individual, but it belonged to everyone. I think that's pretty interesting because it raises all kinds of issues about where we are to this day. You know, what do we do with the most precious resources in our society? Do they belong to everyone? Do we find ways to make sure that there is enough for everyone to go around, or do we allow those resources to be dominated by individuals? Now, in our society, we have allowed certain people to gain enough power, enough wealth, enough influence that they can dominate certain precious resources. That includes, in some places in the world, essential resources like water. Water and water tables and the control and distribution of water has been allowed to fall into private hands. And people use water, and bottled water is, of course, the biggest example of this, use it as a mode of profit. Now, of course, you know the story. If you're familiar with the Bible, the story goes on to tell the story of an individual who comes to overwhelm that communitarian use of the resource. Jacob comes along. He is talking to the shepherds. They're saying, well, you got to wait for everyone to come to open up the well. And then Rachel comes along, bringing her father's flocks, and Jacob is apparently so taken with the beauty of this gorgeous woman that he does this incredible feat of strength. He opens up the well all by himself and allows Rachel to water her flocks. So in this story itself, we have this pulling between the resource belonging to the whole community and the individual who comes to dominate the resource. And that's sort of where we are in the world today. Who is going to dominate? Who's going to control these essential resources? Now, I think the story is, in Genesis, it's a push and pull. I don't think we can possibly legislate that everything always has to belong to the whole community, nor should we allow it to only belong into individual hands. That delicate balance between the needs of the community and the rights of the individual is always going to be a tough one to work out. So there's no simple solutions to this one, folks. If we just go completely communitarian, I think we've seen in many cases, well, you can get into some very serious economic problems down the road. If it just becomes dominated by the power of individuals, we see some of the excesses of capitalism that we have today. That's not really a great outcome. There's got to be a balance between the two in some sense. But that push and pull we see very much in the story of the well and Jacob. So I just wanted to raise this. This story just raises all kinds of issues that are very much alive and at work in our world today. Isn't it amazing? The Bible is this book that can speak to all kinds of circumstances. So I'm going to pray. Gracious God, as we continue to work through that very difficult push and pull between the needs of the whole community and the rights of the individual, help us to find the best balances that create prosperity and hope for all people. And we know that's difficult, but let us find ways. Let us be creative in the ways that we can do that. Amen.